Three, two, one, go.
We're clear to engage. Time on target. 5 mics. Out.
So, Brian, why do you think Cliff Benz is so mad at Donald Trump?
Yeah, it makes you wonder because I mean, isn't he going to keep a gavel and he could actually have something signed into office? That'd be nice, wouldn't it?
Well, I was going to say one thing. Yes. As the Congress turns over, Benz is going to go up in seniority. And I think that, as far as I know, he plans to be there for a while, kind of like Walden. And I'm reading this OPB article that you are quoted in. A big night for Republicans nationally, but not in Oregon. And I get to the bottom after rereading your quote a couple of times because it's very good. Cliff Benz said Trump has his finger on the pulse of the nation, but Ben said doing something like mass deportation would present a lot of logistical challenges. Quote, the sheer number of people it would take to engage in, quote, mass deportation would be huge, he said. And then OPB asked him about what kind of policies the Republicans are going to pass. Quote, we're not led by the nose of the president. We're a separate but equal branch of the government.
That was kind of an odd quote. I didn't know what made of that, but like my conversation with Dirk was, probably 10 minutes, on the phone, and he used what, 7 words.
Friend of
So
the pod, Dirk Vanderhart.
yeah. Well, for sure. And he said he'd come back on too, because I told him I wanted to have him back on and we could really kind of deeper dive as we get into December, probably after November, when we get kind of final results and kind of talk about what it means. And it was funny because he just says, and he didn't use the quote, but he kind of talked about it a little bit, but um, I just said, he goes, well, what's your first take? I go, God, it sure feels like a whole bunch of nothing. Like we did a whole bunch this year and we spent a whole bunch of money to basically have no real change. I
Right.
mean,
No,
I don't
100%.
know. And he kind of laughed and we kind of laughed about it, but I think that's just seems to be the case. I mean, incumbents won. We had, one open seat in the House and one open seat in the Senate that was contested. I mean, meaning contested, meaning that we actually spent money, real money.
Hmm.
And the Senate seat where Senator Tim Knopp was, I mean, everybody, the conventional wisdom across the board was that seat was going blue just based on, prior results in the last 2 years and just the sheer number of liberals moving to Bend, so I think that was my gut, especially. And you've seen some of those maps floating around that showed like all the counties where they
Yep.
went red or blue. And like for some reason in Arizona got caught up in this too. Like it didn't go red like they thought either. And it just stopped sometime or some spot around the Rockies. And that like everything east of the Rockies just went further right. And we didn't. It's an oddity, right? We didn't get that big push. We didn't get the red wave. That's what you listen to podcasts and they're talking all about the red wave that in 22 thought that was going to hit on the East Coast. They didn't get that. And we got a little bit of it on the West Coast, or we capitalized on it, I should say. And then we got nothing. Like, I don't know, maybe the wave this time went like left to right instead of right to left. I don't know. It's truly an oddity that the 4 or 5 states on the West Coast really didn't see the movement we saw in the Midwest on the East Coast that we saw with Trump.
I signed up for this and I'm gonna have to load it on my laptop, but or my iPad because I can't figure out why. But I paid for $2 for the Washington Post access just to see this map that they have where it shows the arrows and which direction the county, each county in the
Yeah.
country went and how they
Awesome.
shifted. It's just a whole bunch of right arrows,
Yeah. Great.
especially on the very populous East Coast. And you saw these heavy swings: New York, New Jersey, Maine, Massachusetts, like all these states that are just considered the blue Northeast that just took huge steps. They're not Republican majority states, although Republicans flipped the main house. They broke super majorities in Vermont. Like there was obviously big underlying waves that happened, but it mostly was like New England.
Yeah, yeah. I think at that area, well, don't you? I mean, I don't. This is just purely only speculation that I think a lot of people that maybe were working in the city, Manhattan, Boston, all those areas, kind of fled to the north, probably during COVID when they could work a lot more remotely and do other things, and
Hmm.
technology just got so much better that those people, and they don't want the policies that they fled from. So they kind of said, nah, we're going to vote Republican. And then what in state houses too, Michigan flipped. They
Yeah.
Minnesota, they got the House back in the Minnesota side where they were able to, break out of that super majority that they had in Minnesota. So I mean, we really saw a lot of big gains for state legislatures across the board up there too. So it was huge. Pennsylvania went back to the Pennsylvania House
Yeah.
went back Republican, and that one was like a toss up. It was like there's 200 dang seats in that Pennsylvania House, and they're
It's
separated by one, which is
it's
crazy.
crazy. And Nevada, the Democrats were expecting to get supermajority so that they could overturn any veto from the governor, Republican Governor Lombardo there. And not only did they not get close, they got like whipped. I don't think they'll quite flip the chambers because of the gerrymandering, but they will get pretty dang close. And really break Arizona, our friends in Arizona. Looks like they're going to maintain their majorities. You do see the arrows on the West Coast not quite as big and not quite as red, but California, almost every county in California took a rightward turn too. And I think for Washington and Oregon, I think things just have to get a lot worse here apparently before. In the East Coast, they've been living under Democratic rule for 50 years, and we're only at 35 years, so we got another 10, 15 years to go before our big rightward turn, I guess. Um, so I
Something
kind of want to cover race by race, kind of the important things and like what they mean for the future of Oregon.
sounds good.
We're gonna have Bonamici and Benz go back to Congress. They're kind of our most senior Congress people now, except for Wyden and Merkley, right, on the Republican and the Democratic side. Dexter going to Congress. I heard during her primary that she's a big right winger. So maybe she'll help us out there.
Nice.
Really loves Israel. Stuff like that.
Is she going to be like MGP then up there in Southwest Washington? Looks like she's going. So she's going to be working across
Hmm.
with us. So I look forward to that. I actually like Dexter. I think
I do too.
all of my interactions with her personally within the Capitol have always been positive, and Vicky had a great relationship with her in the housing chair, and she really helped champion some stuff there. So I'm hoping that she has a little bit of that street, goes with her to Washington, because it's either way that house is going to be close in Congress.
Yes, it is, and you'll have to be people who are collaborative across the aisle will be effective. Um, I don't know if the majority shrink even more for Republicans under this new number? I forgot to check that.
I think, well, I was just listening to Ruthless, and I think they were talking about where they're at. They're at like 218 right now. So they have to win one
Hmm.
more, right? Of the nine. And Chavez
Hmm.
Jr.'s races in that nine. And they think
Yeah,
they're winning five out of those nine. So if it holds that way, maybe they're what, 223, 222, somewhere in there,
I just need to look at what the current breakdown is U.S. House
which
because I
is,
can't remember if
that's what
that's.
a five, six vote, five vote majority. It's, that's not a huge mandate. That's for sure. But the Senate is what's huge, right? I mean, U.S. Senate wise. I mean, that's
Yes.
potentially 54 if they get Sam Brown. Oof.
So McCarthy in 2022 won 222 seats. So right now they could actually gain seats if
Yeah,
they get 224.
yeah.
Um, but even if I think here's the thing, and I think this is going underreported, and this is why the thing that Ben said was really confusing to me. The problem for the House was they had a slim majority and a battle for what the Republican Party was going to be. Were we going to be kind of the moderate party that could help us win, or were we going to be a hard right party? What were we going to be? So that fight happened in the House of Representatives. They took down a speaker. They fought with Mike Johnson about it. They fought about the debt ceiling, all this stuff. That's not going to happen, even with a slim majority in the new Congress. You're going to have the Senate and the president will basically dictate terms to the House of Representatives. Like they're going to have some input. They'll obviously send negotiators and all that stuff, but they're not going to be able to throw the kind of fits that they want. And you know why? Because Trump's going to show up and he's going to say, hey, this is part of my agenda. Vote for it. And a bunch of the people who were really difficult when there was no president that was a Republican are all going to have to go, okay. Most of them are going to go, okay, Mr. President. And there's not going to be a fight left. I think that one of the things that Trump did very effectively in his first term is he made the Freedom Caucus less influential from the sense that they weren't going to be able to play these games about shutting down the government. I don't think Trump wants that. And so I think that even with a slim majority, this is going to be a way more effective House than it was last time. And that's why I don't understand Bence's point. It's like, don't you want a president that's going to help you set an agenda? Yes, of course you're a separate branch of government, but like emphasizing that right now is weird, especially when the Senate was asked, the Senate leaders right now are being asked about confirmations, which they're probably going to start before Trump even takes office. They're going to start it as soon as the new Congress is sworn in, which is interesting to me. I didn't know you could do that.
Yeah, I
And
think quicker than we can.
yes. And then the second thing is Barrasso was basically like, they were asked what's on the agenda, and they're like, that's up to the president. Even the Senate, you would think the Senate would be the one they'll be able to throw their weight around because they've got still some moderates and they can do their thing, and the filibuster is there. They're just like, let's let the president make some decisions first, and I think that's why, again, that's why the Benz thing is weird.
I think that he was probably a Nikki Haley supporter. I don't know. Because I don't really get it. I mean, I think when you're the senior Republican member, in the state, and I'll probably get some crap for this, but I didn't really see a whole bunch of activity around helping Lori Chavez Dreamer in my neck of the woods here in Central Oregon. I didn't recall seeing any joint events happening with Republicans to whoop up the base. All that sort of stuff. So I maybe it's just disconnected. I don't know. To be honest with you, I didn't really see much events at all during campaign cycle. So it's an oddity to me compared to my 20 years of watching and working with Greg Walden when he was a congressman in this district. I mean, even when he was chairman of the NRCC, he was out here campaigning for people in Oregon, and I just didn't see that, and I think that that's kind of a little bit of a bummer from that standpoint, because I think a congressman matters, and to have that cachet, the title, the things, it helps things happen. And I saw Kevin McCarthy in Redmond and Bend campaigning for Lori Chavez Dreamer more than I saw Cliff Benz.
Isn't that crazy?
Yeah, I don't, I'm not really sure. Who knows? I mean, moving on.
All right. Well, back to the results. So federally, I think there was some bluster. I'll call it bluster in the 6th district. We were, some Republicans were getting these internal polls, and one of them even got published in the Catalyst saying that the 6th congressional district was very, very close. It was not, in fact, very, very close. It was pretty much exactly what, and if you were a state rep candidate in a district that was potentially winnable and you spent zero money, you did about as well as Mike Erickson did. I guess that was the strategy he took: spend zero money or almost zero money.
Well, he did at the end. So we'll see what
the
are, but
I think the investment. I think if he had invested the $2 million, he puts up a better fight. But he just didn't want to. I think he was trying to convince national groups to come in, and as you see, they had. We talked about this. They were never going to be held hostage. They were always just going to put the resources in other races.
Yeah, yeah, Mike's not a good candidate for Congress. I mean, that's just the reality. I think you should try mayor or something in Lake Oswego or somewhere. But that's also I think that's reaching too far, too fast. I mean, Mike's always done that from the get-go. He's always reached too far, too fast, too early. Never really built that great. Of course, he never won when he ran for the legislature either. But I just think that it was. Didn't you feel like when you're watching TV and you would see the Salinas ad come on again, like, whoa, is this deja vu? Is this 2022 again? I think they literally just redid that commercial. And even though, and his only response to that was like, I sued and won, and she's running the same ads again. It's like, well, apparently she doesn't care. So, and apparently it must not matter because nobody cares. And I don't think anybody cared. And I think you got to have at least a reason why you're fighting. And the difference between this and CD6 or CD5 and Southwest Washington is, starkly different. And he wasn't, the percentage was not what he lost by 20,000, 25,000 votes. I mean, it's not horribly worse, but just not just candidate quality matters here. And it's just not there.
And then looking at the fifth congressional district, this one's sort of a heartbreaker for Republicans. And I think so. I just did the math of the deficit between Bynum and Chavez Dreamer seems to be increasing a little bit. It's now 7,500 votes. The percentage is going down as more votes get counted,
Yeah.
but she was down 6,000 raw votes. Now it's 7,500. To me, it looks like it's going the wrong direction. Her biggest problem is that she lost potentially. I saw Horvick tweet about this 4,000 votes to this independent guy, Brett Smith, and 1,200 votes in Lynn County specifically, a county that is came through with basically a huge margin for her last time. And I think there was obviously some foul play here as Democrats either encouraged or benefited from and spent. I mean, I got so much mail for Sonia Feintesh and robocalls for like the last 14 days of the election repeated. And I think that not enough of that went answered. I didn't get as much contact from Chavez Dream. Now maybe they made a correct assumption and they didn't have to worry about me. They knew I was a hard Republican voter. I wasn't going to be moved, but my hope is that they were able to fend off some of that, but it looks like it's going to be just a little bit not enough, which is too bad.
Don't you think? Yeah, there's definitely a bunch of foul play going on here. And, these candidates that don't matter. And I think that libertarian stuff, Pacific Green, mostly third party guys. And I think when we had Richard Burke on, he talked about libertarian parties that don't get involved in these very super competitive races. Take your message to districts that they aren't competitive, or there's not a Republican running, or there's not a Democrat running, to kind of try to build your party message, right? To build your message while not messing up the R versus D thing. So you only do it because you actually want the Republican to lose. You don't do it
Right.
in support of the Democrat, or in support of the Republican. And the same thing goes with Pacific Green. And I think the independent party is doing all that they can to be relevant to anybody and somebody in the state of Oregon, when they're the most irrelevant piece of crap party on the planet. That's nothing but just a bunch of Democrats who don't really like the way the Democrat Party's going. So they kind of want to be slightly different, but yet they're all Democrats. So I just think it was a lot of foul play, and it's just it's kind of crap to see, and it's a bummer, but it happens. I mean, it's politics. I mean, you can't cry about it. You have to just do it. And I don't, maybe
Yep.
the Pacific Green person, they didn't spend enough mail, or Democrats aren't swayed like Republicans
Right.
were with the libertarian message. So, or the independent message that came down through. Did you get any independent mail?
I did not, but our household probably is classified as pretty hard Republican. So, we've got three new statewide office holders. And I'll be honest, I like Brian Boquist. I like Will Lathrop. There's a third candidate I don't like, but we're not going to worry about that. I think that we had good candidates, but obviously not a year where Republicans would be able to pick up very much statewide. But I'm going to give the Democrats a ton of credit. And I think I said this before, but I can't remember if I said it on the podcast. They're putting the adults in charge. These are good, effective members of their party who I would say were not aggressively partisan. Tobias Reed wasn't super partisan. I think Steiner, to the extent that when she was in the budget position, she had to be somewhat partisan for her party, and same thing with Rayfield in their positions. But I don't view them as like aggressive partisan people. All three of those guys, I think, will be better for Democrats than some of the candidates they've previously put up, like Fagan and Avakian and Jamie McLeod Skinner. And like, they're way, way, way better candidates. And I think that they will do pretty good jobs for Democrats in those positions. Overall, I think this is good for Democrats in terms of the field that they've got of potential people to run for governor after Kotek and all that. I mean, they're setting themselves up well.
Yeah. I think the Pacific Green progressive people, I mean, it looks like, because I don't imagine Mary King running in that treasurer's race. I mean, nobody put her up to it so they could siphon votes off of, Steiner, and the same thing in the Secretary of State's race here. So maybe this is like, maybe we're seeing a resurgence of the Pacific Green Party or the Progressive Party in Oregon.
Well, one of the
Welcome, and
things,
please run for state races when you get a chance.
remember there was 1 week where Jeff Golden was running against Steiner in the primary and then he dropped out.
Yeah.
And one of Jeff Golden's main policy priorities is the state bank. And I went and looked on Mary King's social media, and she was running on the creation of a state bank. There's like a small segment of people that are really dialed into creating the state bank because they think that's the be all end all. It'll fix all of our problems. It will not. It'll create more. But the other thing too is apparently there are some. I'm just hearing anecdotally a little bit about, Steiner is Jewish, and anti-Israel people maybe not as excited about voting for Steiner, and so those votes
Yeah.
may have gone to Mary King. Again, seems to be a very small segment of the population. I'd say that's not a very good reason to vote against a candidate, but I'm pro-Israel, so.
Yeah, but she would. I mean, if Mary's not in the race, it's not like those were going to Boquist. So
No.
it's safe to say. But Bryan got 44%. That's pretty good. Senator Boquist did a decent job. I mean, for literally doing nothing besides maybe, I think he put out one email, and Senator Lithicum put out probably like 6 or 7 emails. But I saw a few signs for them, I guess, around the state when I was driving. I mean, not a lot, but and I think in a future podcast, I really want to talk about signs, because I really feel like they're worthless and a waste of time.
Yes.
Because Democrats don't do them, and they win.
I'm right there with you.
So I just, as Republicans, we always feel like we need to put signs up because it makes us do something. I also think door knocking could be worthless, but we can revisit that later on what sort of field strategies make sense and stuff.
Anecdotally, I sort of agree with you in some ways. So, and here's the other thing too,
that was a very broad stroke, but I think I'd love to dive into it at some point and really talk about what actually moves voters, because I think we really need to have a strong discussion about that and what does actually move voters. And then the Rayfield Will Lathrop one, I think I was proud of Will. I thought he ran a good race, and to get above 45%, which is very hard to do as a Republican, goes to show you that he ran a good race. I don't think it was that Rayfield ran a bad race or anything like that. I think that Dan's he's a competent candidate, and he's competent at his job, and he knows what he's doing. And to your point, I agree that all three of these senators, I know them, and heck, I've had Dan at the house for dinner. And
you big
endorsed
rhino.
Will, in the race, just because, and I gave Will money just because I really thought Will would do a great job, and it was nothing against Dan, but I think that really I saw two good quality candidates there on both sides, and I hope that the Republicans, put people who want to do what Will did, go raise $2 million, go up and down around the state and put the work in, and I know a loss is still a loss and it sucks, but I think you feel a little bit better when you actually do the work, and all of that difference netted in 2.5 points, 3 points over the other guys. But maybe if we continue to do it, we can move that to 6 points. And then you
Hmm.
move that to 7 points, and eventually you're now competing. And I think you can't just sit in your office, wherever you are, try to raise a bunch of money and throw a bunch of shit on TV and expect you're going to get a result. I think that Will
I
showed you how to get out there and talk to people.
Yeah, I will say, I was going to say the result of only getting 2 more points, I think, is going to make it so that some people will be discouraged from doing that. But I think if you have the red wave hit Oregon, I could totally see a scenario where Will ends up winning because he worked, and Boquist and Linthicum lose very close elections because they didn't, right? And that's the difference is you put yourself in a position to win, but you're not going to be able to win every race. And then if things break your way, like with McCormick in Pennsylvania, you win. And if things don't break your way in like Michigan or Wisconsin or stuff like that, you lose a close race, right? But you're putting yourself in a position to win
Yep.
every single time.
Yeah, that same thing
So
was
when you,
Erickson there, right? I mean, if he was in a better
hmm
position, and we would have got the red county wave that we saw in those, in Michigan and Minnesota and those, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania. If that would have hit Oregon, we would have won.
hmm
We would have won that race. But if you're not, and he would have still lost if he didn't get, if we got a 3 point bump, he still loses by two. Lori Chavez Dreamer knocks it out of the park, and Joe Kent wins, right? So we're moving forward, but you have to be in a position to take that W, and instead of just losing.
yeah. Interesting note: sixth district was closer than the fourth this time. Monique did have a libertarian candidate taking from her, but I do think I'm sort of interested in the theory. The NRCC felt like the fourth was more vulnerable. I don't know that we have a lot of evidence necessarily for that yet. So it'll be interesting to see in future elections how aggressively they contest the sixth versus the fourth, and which one they kind of decide to go after if they do decide to go
They
after
were
them.
kind of hoping, I think, some of that Val Hoyle stuff with Lamoda was going to stick, and then there would be maybe something
Hmm.
more there. And I think it just didn't materialize, and uh, just didn't break. So, but I wouldn't give up on it. I mean, I think that Eugene and Corvallis in that district is pretty.
Hmm.
That's the crack there. That's for sure. And with Trump on the ticket, I mean, we're clearly not a Trump state. So we're clearly not a state that is,
No.
swingy a little bit like Wisconsin or Michigan, where Trump's message was resonating. I mean, that's clear. That there's no doubt. And it turns out that maybe even, Arizona and Nevada even are more so than, Nevada, especially more so than Arizona. But we'll see. We'll kind of see how things go. But you got to keep putting your foot out there.
All right, ballot measures. This one is so interesting to me. Yes on 115. I'm glad that people got this because there was no real campaign for it or against it. There's no websites. There's no nothing. Shemia Fagan might have been knocking doors because she's worried that now she's going to get impeached, even though after she resigned from office.
Right. That
Republicans should induce articles of impeachment against Shemia Fagan in this session. I think that would be amazing. Um, let's get it drafted, Brian.
retroactive. I wonder if they allow
Yeah.
us.
Oh, we should test it out.
And Brown.
So measure one. So measure 115 passes 60-36. So here's the great test. A pretty normal ballot. 36% of the state will just vote no on anything. I think that's kind of a good baseline, decent baseline. I think if you go back and look at
Yeah,
other measures that
yeah.
were like this, 35% of people are just going to vote no, and I totally respect that. I think that's
Mhm.
fine.
I agree.
Um, And then measure 116. Frankly, I was happy to see this fail. We worked on this in the legislature, and the idea behind it was supposed to be people need to be getting paid more for public service, and that we were going to make it so that it would be easier for people to do this public service. So you don't have
Yeah.
statewide elected officials only making 75,000 and struggling to make ends meet, right? Which I think will sound silly, rightfully so to some working people, but what they focused on with this whole campaign, and you look at the social media for Yes on 116, it's just all the alphabet soup groups talking about how we can get more people from diverse backgrounds to run for office. And I don't have any problem with recruiting diverse candidates. I think that's good. I think that's
Oh,
fine.
we do it
But
too.
they just totally missed. what this measure is about. This measure is not about, and especially since most of those groups recruit for Democrats, they're more focused on the Democrat aspect of this. And you just look at all the groups: Partnership for Safety and Justice, PCUN, ONA, Oregon Futures Lab, AFL-CIO. They didn't do any work to get Republicans on board, and I think that cost them this rate. OLCV, it was just all the liberal alphabet soup groups running their own thing. They didn't call any Republicans and ask for help. They didn't get Republicans to stump. I think there would have been some that would have, but they ignored it. They ignored half the electorate, and it cost them a pretty solid defeat, honestly, in a thing that I think a lot of people thought might pass.
I think I remember going and speaking about this one to a couple of Republican groups, and I was I would say, hey, you vote how you want to vote on this one. I don't really care. I think if you want to vote yourself a pay raise, I think you got to stand there and kind of vote for it. But I said, and I did advocate. I said the legislature is supposed to be a citizen legislature, so I get that point of it. But these statewide offices, the Shamia Fagans, the governor,
Hmm.
I mean, they're you have to give up your life to go serve in that capacity. And I think, I mean, Jack, even like the real estate commissioner, I mean, they get paid junk money. I mean, it's not good money on any level. I mean, you and I make more as staffers. So I think that it's not necessarily as fair, especially for these statewide positions. And that was the only part that I don't want to say I was advocating for, but I was okay with there being a commission to say, hey, what is using the real estate commission again? What does that guy make or girl make in Montana and in Nevada and other states that are comparable to our size, or the number of licensed realtors or what have you, and come back with a compensation schedule that makes sense. So, but regardless, I think we could still take that up in the legislature. I don't think it would be that big of a deal. I don't think the backlash is as horrendous as everybody thinks it is. I think that most people understand that now, that government and politics is kind of a year-round job anymore. And I think the idea of it being a citizen legislature is probably held by a pretty small majority of people, or minority of people. But I think at the end of the day, just take the case, take the vote, and then take the bullets if you're going to use them. So I think it's because heck, half the Democrats are triple dippers anyways. So what does it really matter? So I think just take our lumps. I was happy with 115. I was glad to see that one go through. I think that's important to have that. I think some Republicans were worried that would be used against us. And I said, the day we have a 2/3 majority in the House and the Senate and it's used against us, or they have one, or we win a statewide, if we win a statewide race, we're not going to be in the super minority in the legislature. That's just the two of those are just so not going to happen. So I
Right.
kind of with you. The one I was most excited about is ranked choice voting going down.
Whew. Huge.
So great.
Huge.
Do you
There
think?
were
Do
three
you think?
counties that voted yes. Benton. Oh, I'm sorry,
Oh,
Brian. Benton County.
I was going to let you. I was just going to ask you, since you were way more involved in this one than me, or at least tracking it and being engaged in it. Do you think that I truly believe that this one failed because Multnomah County had all of that just crap with Portland ranked choice voting, that they literally looked at the other one and said, oh, I'm not doing this statewide. There's just no way. Because they spent a ton of money trying to get it passed.
So I'm looking at the Multnomah. If you go into, not everybody knows this, when you're on the results.oregonvotes.gov, if you click on Multnomah County and then you click on local results for state contests, you basically see what Multnomah reports for, like all of the measures and stuff like that. So they voted 73% yes for cannabis, 25% yes for the tax increase, 54% yes for ranked choice voting, 51% yes for independent service. So it's basically the same vote for ranked choice voting and for the independent commission. And to me, that says they never broke out of the bubble of people who follow whatever the voter guide is that they get from their union or from their, the preferred group, the Oregon voter guide that Democrats distribute, right? I think they never got outside of that bubble. And they just sort of assumed that the $9 million of mail and TV was going to be enough
Yeah.
to convince people to change how they vote. And I think even in and I text with the guy from Arizona, not Arizona, Alaska, which just barely repealed ranked choice voting. So
Yeah.
here's tonight's election. Missouri banned ranked choice voting. Alaska repealed it. South Dakota, Nevada, Colorado, Montana, Arizona, Idaho, and Oregon all voted down ranked choice voting.
I think it's
I
gone.
think
Yeah.
I think it's done.
Yeah.
I think it's done. And I think that just like, and people will rightly say, well, how are you going to get it so that the minority candidates don't, ruin your vote? I get that, but I think the system that we have that people understand is still better than switching to ranked choice voting and calling all that confusion just to try to manufacture a candidate's majority win. It doesn't make sense to me.
I don't know why. I mean, what's wrong with what all of a sudden we're gonna have what ranked choice voting for president? I mean, you have to have a voting system that is the same for president as it is for your local city council. Like people, it's very easy to understand. It's one bubble that you have to fill in and you go away. I think once you start confusing voters with stuff and making them do, you know, crayon math and everything, it's just not going to work. I think there's got to be an ulterior motive, or it's just a bunch of League of Women's Voters people that got together and were bored because they wanted something else to do, so they concocted this horrible star, or ranked choice voting or any of this crap that really just doesn't matter. I mean, it's just silliness.
Oakville, I think it was Oakville. Is Oakville a city in Oregon? Hold on. There was a city in Lane County that had star voting on local, and it got voted down too. That's what cracks me up
Nice.
is that
In
nobody
Oakville.
wants to do this stuff.
However, now in
And
caucus elections, Reagan, I believe caucus elections should be ranked choice voting because I that would be awesome. Like I want to see four people running for majority leader against Ben Bowman, and I want to see if he can maintain.
I
Uh,
think I think Ben does win under that scenario because he's like the least offensive. He tries to be very inoffensive as a person. I don't see him putting out a lot of anti-Republican statements. Because he loves
or
them.
like,
He
wouldn't it
really
be?
loves Republicans.
Well, if we all had to vote, actually, be more relative to like Speaker of the House and President of the Senate, right? Because then you let both sides get a vote for that one
There
job,
you
right?
go.
So only majority minorities only by the caucus. So the Speaker of the House,
Yes.
everybody gets to vote. Obviously, the majority has the votes, but it would be really crazy if you had, like Speaker Fahey up there against the Jeff Helfrich and see where they come out if they had a ranked choice them. So, because you could find out if all of a sudden your party doesn't really like you.
Yes. Well, and the way it works is the nominee for speaker is put up by the majority party. So they
Yeah.
get to pick. So inside their caucus, if you added all the Republicans to that vote, I would look totally different. You'd get something more like Mike Johnson, where you had to pick somebody in the middle of the whole thing, as opposed to
Oh,
just
yeah, yeah.
whoever was the previous majority leader or whoever has the most votes on the Democratic side. You'd get a more moderate, probably a moderate Democrat is what you'd get. In a lot of scenarios under the ranking because the liberals would rank their progressive choice first. They'd be like Reagan Confam first, but Confam would get
Yeah.
eliminated almost immediately, and then they would go to, and you'd end up more in the middle.
That's
So,
probably true. Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, that'd be kind of fun.
all right, so legislature. There really isn't a ton to say about the Senate. The one thing I will do is if you scroll through here, you see District 1, we get 70%. District 2, we get 66%. District 9, we get 69% of the vote. District 12, 55% of the vote. If we redid fair maps, what would happen is in blue years, we would get creamed because our districts are packed full. Our Republican districts are packed chock full of Republicans. But in
Yeah,
the years where we were competitive, we would actually be able to win majorities. Under the current maps, they play the safe game where they pack as many Republicans into the districts as they can, and our vote is just too inefficiently distributed to be competitive.
yeah, I would agree.
So good to see
Obviously,
Dick Anderson return to the Senate.
I ran two of these races, so obviously Senator. It just tells you the difference between the coast and Gresham. Really, I mean, the
Hmm.
coast is clearly red, and also I would just say that Senator Anderson. I mean, I think if it's a different candidate, he's just the coast. Like he fits the coast. I mean, it's just
Right.
you think of coastal senators, you literally think of him and Weber, right? Those are the first two to come to mind, and him probably even more so, just because he kind of looks like he's belongs sitting on a this on a what are they Adranac? What do they call those chairs? The beach chairs, out there reading his book, smoking his pipe or something. Like he's just there's just something about him, and he did a great job. He worked his tail off and really got around. He got all the mayors to endorse him. All the Democrats, Republicans really built a good, strong coalition, won by 6,000 votes. Even if the Democrats would have thrown $1 million at this one, we still would have won. I don't think it would have mattered.
I agree.
We built a strong base of support there. And I think the difference is, hey, look at that. Raymond loves calling me. I think if speak of Gresham, like he just knew I was thinking of him. But also the difference here, and this is what I would say, is that Republicans and Democrat turnout, at least so far, and this is, Thursday, November 7th, 81% Democrats in Senator Anderson's district compared to 82% Republicans and 64% of non-affiliated voters voted, and I would say that Senator Anderson wins the dominant amount of those NAV votes. So we come up pretty close to now that obviously is why we won by 6,000 votes. And then you go to Gresham where the Democrats really didn't turn out. I mean, it was 70% voter turnout in that district and 76% Republican turnout. So still a lower Republican turnout that we needed to be competitive, but the non-affiliated voters and all the others, I just grouped them all together, like every other party. 46% turned out in that Gresham district. And we have to have, and that's a minus 11.6 voter registration. So we're already starting in a huge hole. We made up 6%, 5% with Republicans, and we still finished 5% short, or ultimately 55-45, but 5% going the other way. But at 46% voter turnout, we lose. If we would have got 64%, 65, 68% voter turnout on the non-affiliated voters that wanted to change, of course, they had to be our voters. Then I think we're super competitive. But that's just such a low voter turnout that there's just no chance we win that seat with a 46% non-affiliated. We need, when you're that far in the hole to begin with, you got to have non-affiliated voters turn out, and we could not drag them to the polls. We couldn't do anything to get them to the polls. I don't know if it was all the rain that they got this last weekend or what, but I mean, it tanked. So that's my synopsis on those ones. I think the messaging was kind of clear. I mean, but at the end of the day, we just couldn't get them to turn out, and therefore we lost those House seats. And you can look at, and the same thing goes into the House. John Masterman, and I think I pulled this one up. No, I pulled up 40, House District 40, Michael Newgard. You had 76% Democrat turnout, 77% Republican turnout. So Representative Hartman. So you had about the same voter turnout, slightly better Republican, but 55% only of the NAVs showed up to vote. So therefore, she wins by 1,700 votes or whatever. So you're not going to be able to make up those differences, and without having more non-affiliated voters show up to vote and vote for obviously Republicans. So the metro area was pretty disappointing.
I think you're totally right in terms of this non-affiliated issue, because Republicans, when we do well, we typically beat the advantage in typically we outperform top of the ticket at the legislative level. And it will be interesting to see, especially in the four districts, the four House districts where Biden won, that were sort of quote unquote the target districts for Democrats, where the only one they got close in was Helfrich. And I don't even think that was the one at the top of their list ultimately, which I think is the most interesting part of it. Does Woodburn, does the Woodburn district stay a quote unquote Harris district? Right. Same thing with Salem and all those ones, right? What's the trend?
Yeah.
And then I think you're right. The low non-affiliated turnout, those are voters that we are normally able to flip to close the registration gap. And with them not turning out at a higher rate, there's nothing you could do. And they're not a Republican GOTV program isn't necessarily going to drive them to the polls either, right? They need the things have to be. I think there's just ultimately we'll have to see what the kind of Senate supermajority cooks up and what the House is willing to pass and see how aggressive they're willing to get because we could have some budget problems coming up, especially if the economy doesn't turn around right away under Trump. If it takes a couple of years to do that, things could get bad, and then people may end up going sort of the opposite direction, even in a Trump midterm. I don't know, but we'll have to wait and see on that.
Yeah, we'll pull out some of these districts and really do a 2022 to 2024, like a 2020, probably 22, and then 24 comparison. It's more 22, 24 because we had redistricting there in 20, so it's hard to compare them all. But I think we can look at the precinct level. The Harris Biden stuff would be interesting to see if Trump moved more voters or less voters from Harris or from Biden to Harris. So the other one, for instance, in that Helfrich race, which was a lot closer than everybody thought, it should have been, but that one was, 80% Democrat turnout, 81% Republican turnout. So it was kind of right on par. Slightly higher turnout with NAVs, though. I mean, you had 60% non-affiliated voter turnout. So that and a super high Hood River turnout. So I don't think Hood River turns out to vote there. That's and that's not a Republican friendly county from our standpoint. And just a couple other notes too, like I think Virginia Stapleton, the Democrat against Representative Mannix. Democrats turned out 76%, Republicans looks like they're about 81%. But that NAV turnout was lower at 57%. So Kevin didn't quite have a bigger margin of victory than maybe he had 2 years ago. And I think it's because of some of those turnout numbers where in those districts where we know non-affiliated voters vote right. Now, to give you the alternative to that is the Kerry Lopez race in Deschutes County. So super high turnout, 86% Democrat, 87% Republican turnout. That's as of now, which is actually lower than 2020, by the way, but still super high comparative to the other districts. But it also had an 80% non-affiliated voter turnout. So it had a super high non-affiliated voter turnout. But then I dug a little deeper into that, and over half of those non-affiliated voters lived in Bend. So
Yeah.
the predominant theory is that Redmond sisters in the rural parts of Deschutes County, non-affiliated voters didn't turn out the vote, and therefore she loses 55-45, or it's I think 54-46. But regardless, that's what happens in a district like that, where your NAVs from an area like Bend are going to vote center left, and your NAVs outside of that vote center right. But if they don't show up to vote, see you later. It's just there's no way around it, and that's so messaging doesn't even matter if you don't have the votes to get there. And I think that's it truly is the dichotomy of Deschutes County, where now you're I think seeing even Redmond, and I'll dive into these ones numbers because we'll want to take a look and see, do we just write off Deschutes County at this point? Like, is those two House seats, and the Senate seat clearly gone, but is House District 53 basically just like 54 now? So the map, I would say our takeaway from these legislative races, Reagan, I said my downtrodden theory is our map has gotten a lot smaller.
Mm-hmm.
And from 22, it's gotten a lot smaller. And part of that, I think, is candidate quality. Part of that is the red wave somehow or another from Trump. Maybe there's an anti-Trump stuff and it just didn't hit Oregon and didn't get here. It did actually end at the Cascades. because Washington didn't have good legislative turnout either. So I don't know. Maybe they're just too similar. So, but I think the problem that I'm seeing is that the map in the future does not look super bright if you're Republican in Oregon.
I tend to agree with you. The other part of this is that, and I'm looking for the Deschutes County results to see. So it was 55-44 for Harris, and I think Biden just barely flipped it. 2020
Yeah.
presidential. So I mean, Deschutes has moved hard left. It happened really fast. Like we saw the trend start, and it starts kind of slow, and then it just accelerates. And I mean, I think the other problem is Clackamas, same margin, 55-45, basically. And so that makes it so that if you can't compete in Clackamas, you can't compete in Deschutes. That's two big population center areas where we have to do well in order to do well in the legislature, to do well statewide, to do well in congressional races. And if we've kind of lost those counties for a while, that's going to make it really incredibly challenging to make up.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's going to be, we got to figure out a way to really reorganize our messaging and there, that, and we'll talk about this more as we move further along, but the messaging across the Democrats was all one message, abortion, 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 and more abortion, so it didn't really matter. Maybe sprinkle in a little MAGA, on top of that. And so there was that mess in a state that is so pro-choice. It's so funny that they can run messaging that, the fear mongering was so intense across the spectrum that, didn't make a difference what Republicans were saying. People weren't buying it. That or the turnout. I mean, I don't, until you get into it, in areas where we know that the turnout was high, like a Carrie Lopez race where she still loses, well, obviously they put Harris and pro-choice above anything else, right? So all those other things, all the other issues didn't matter. In a district like a Raymond Love and Gresham, or in those House districts kind of east of there, where they have a huge problem with drugs and homelessness, where they know it, they all say it's their number one issue. But I don't know if, I don't believe pro-choice messaging won there. I think voter apathy probably won there, because I think that those NAVs, because the polling was all good in those districts, but the polling doesn't equate to turnout. And the polling is just somebody sitting at home that happens to answer their phone. So I think that's probably the difference there, and we'll dive into it a little bit more as we get some more finalized numbers. Kind of next week we'll see some more finalized numbers. But I'll be in Hawaii, so I probably won't look until after I get back.
I think I'm good to take a week off for the podcast
Well, you
as
can have
well. So
somebody
we
on.
I could, or just take a week off. I'm good with
Yeah,
that too. We did a lot of content leading up to the election.
yeah,
Breaking news, Brian. The AP has called Dave McCormick wins Senate for Pennsylvania, giving Republicans a 53-seat majority, which I think is pretty big, mostly because you've got Collins and Murkowski, who are the two. Of course, we have the tiebreaker, but you've kind of got the two more liberal Republicans. I think McCormick is going to give Trump some breathing room, probably, on some of his agenda items, which I think is a good thing. So.
Yeah, that is great. Yeah, Pennsylvania was the true surprise. I think of the presidential stuff, and I think that we can end it with the presidential stuff.
It was the Amish, Brian.
Yeah, right. And I think President Trump, I believe at the end of the day, they threw everything they had against this man, and I think the resentment of voters to the Democrat machine, I believe that really got a lot of people to finally just go, you know what? I mean, yeah, you may not like everything he says and does, but he's not Hitler. I mean, he's not. And then I think his surrogates that came on board, from RFK to Elon Musk, I think Elon Musk was a huge play for Republicans. And I think Joe Rogan interview, like all of this stuff, you kind of started just saying, you'd hear Trump and you'd be like, he doesn't sound crazy to me. Yeah, he says some crazy shit, but all that stuff that's just taken out of context. If you listen to if you listen to a 3-hour conversation with Joe Rogan, like 3 hours, this guy is coherent. He is actually wildly smart, well read about legislation and ideas and stuff. We'll see if the tariffs and some of the other things makes. I don't know, but they're good ideas. Like, let's do something. Let's have an America First agenda. So I'm blessed to live in America. I'm so happy we won the U.S. Senate 53. Maybe Sam Brown gets over the finish line. That would be wonderful to have 54. I don't know if that's going to happen in Nevada, but
they already called that one for Rosen. She took a late lead from a larger drop than expected
where's
from
my
Clark
bubble?
County. Yeah, sorry. Arizona's still out there. They haven't called it, and Arizona counts so low. So it could be a few days before we know for sure.
Do without Carrie Lake.
Don't necessarily
For
disagree.
her running for office, but I guess if she's in the Senate, you don't have to hear from her for 6 years. So that's that. I don't know, but I don't know the Gallego guy. I don't really know him at all, but I would assume that he's going to be somewhat moderate. So hopefully he's, because he's replacing an independent. So that might be interesting.
Brian, I was doing some research for the Trump apparatus and the federal Republicans looking for bipartisan legislation. I was reading up on this pack the court thing that Democrats keep talking about, and they seemed really interested in it. So I don't know if they'll be interested now in packing the court and eliminating the filibuster, but I think that's, Republicans should at least talk about it and make them nervous before they don't do it.
I think that's not a bad idea. Yeah, let's just go ahead and pack that bad boy.
I just think it's really I like it because it really shows how short-sighted Democrats typically are in terms of always trying to change the rules to benefit themselves. And then I don't think we'll see a single tweet. I looked back through Jeff Merkley, reform the filibuster, only a talking filibuster. That's his thing. I don't think we'll see a single reform the filibuster tweet in the next 2 years, maybe the next 4 years.
Probably
from
not.
Merkley. And I'll be fine with that. He should move on to other stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. Well, more to come. All of the things. Enjoy a little time off, Reagan, before we start plowing into the legislature. So,
Yep. Get ready. Crosstabs is going to become legislation central.
Yeah, I'm going to go to the building this year too. So I decided that I'll hang out with Senator Anderson and be his chief of staff in the legislature during Salem, and that'll be kind of fun. So it'll be good.
Awesome. Well, good work, Brian, this year. And looking forward to an exciting legislative session. Then we'll see. Maybe you and I will both retire from campaigns before 2026.
And then we can just comment on them. That'd be more fun.
I think that's the right call. I think it's a good career choice.
I'm on board.
Thanks. Good to see you.
All right. Bye.